Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am Jan Mercer-Doms, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. We are an ecosystem of brands for women by women, connecting women to each other and to the companies, causes, and organizations that champion equity for women professionally and personally. You've joined us today for our Women in Money series, which we host every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please make sure to check us out at joinmayshad.com for all of our upcoming programming. We do our diversity, equity, inclusion series the same time at 4 o'clock on Tuesday afternoons, and we have workshop Wednesdays at 3 o'clock on Wednesdays. Today we have a really very special show, two incredible women who have reinvented, reimagined, and pivoted many times in their careers, leading us to the conversation that we have today related to women in money during the time of COVID. We're champion women who lead by example truly today. Welcome to Noreen Weiss and Robyn Morrison. Hi, Robyn. Hi, Noreen.
Hi, Jan.
Hi. Great to be here.
Thanks.
Noreen Weiss is the partner and co-founder of McDonald Weiss. She is an expert in cross-border business development, capital markets and finance, securities law, M&As, and corporate and commercial matters to advise businesses in all stages of corporate life cycle and to assist investors. Her experience includes seed to late stage finance, IPOs, ICOs, STOs, securities law compliance, international corporate structuring and business development, global expansion, and IP protection strategy and licensing, product sales and distribution, incentive compensation, and commercial contracts. We are in good hands with Noreen today, for sure. And Robyn Morrison, who is founder and principal of More Strategy, an independent financial advisory and consultancy firm specializing in capital introduction, impact, and value-based investing, financial literacy and strategy, and international philanthropy. Robyn has over 20 years of experience with high net worth individuals, families, small businesses, foundations at iconic institutions such as Align Impact, Bank of America Private Bank, Bessemer Trust, and Thomson Reuters. Again, we're in amazing hands with Robyn with you as well. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
So, it's interesting in this moment in time, there's so many different issues at play. The pandemic and the call to action around racial injustice aside, we also know that wealth transfer in this country is going to be tremendous. Approximately $30 trillion of wealth is set to change hands in the next 3 to 4 decades, with women inheriting a sizable portion of that from their spouses and from their aging parents. And wondering, from a financial literacy perspective and the work that you both do, talk to us about the work you do with empowering women and why is being a part of the work that you do from a mission-based perspective so vitally important, especially now. Robyn, let's start with you and then we'll go to Noreen.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me and recognizing that everything is changing on a minute by minute, hour by hour. But one thing that's just absolutely critical for us to acknowledge that knowledge is power, money is power, and women need both money, power, or I guess women need money, knowledge, and power. And that has not changed. And so we know that philanthropy, we know that investing, we know that all of these ways to utilize our assets are super important. But there is a key component that is missing, and that is the basic financial literacy. And I'm not just talking about how to invest. I'm talking about going back to the basics. What's the difference between simple interest? What's the difference between compound interest? How to keep your assets safe, insurance, and all of the basic concepts so that we can go on to include impact investing, the idea that you can do well and do good and you can drive your assets to do more. And all of these things, this knowledge that you need to bring through literacy will again bring the power, the money will bring the power, so that women can take ownership, can get that transfer of wealth and use it for greater purposes.
And Robyn, I know that this cause is really important to you too personally. Let's talk a bit about that as well.
Well, I mean, I think one of the questions that we posed in preparing for this is why are these causes important to me? And I'd almost ask back, like, why wouldn't they be, right? I grew up in a home where the ethos was if I had a lemonade stand and I made $10, automatically half was to give away to the charity of my choice. And so I grew up with that foundational underpinning of wanting to do well, and then going through, traditional schooling and realizing I wanted to be on Wall Street and do really well. How can I put those two worlds together? And that's where we work at the intersection of money and meaning, of profit and purpose, right? And we do all sorts of creative things with our capital. So for me personally, gone are the days, and in general, gone are the days of the bifurcation between investments and philanthropy, right? There's a new way to do it, and it speaks much more to how we can, use our assets, and candidly speaks much more to women, right? Women have empathetic concern. When we talk about philanthropy, the definition is voluntary action for public good. And if you look at the history of philanthropy, right, you can go back 250 years and the early causes, and working on soldiers, and then working with WISE and all these different institutions that have a traditional long, rich past of women volunteers. And now we're adding in this whole different paradigm of using our assets. And I want to be here to serve. I want to be here to help women do all the really great things that are available. And so, I love the educational part of all of this. And I do believe that you can have it all, but all can't have you. And so when we kind of focus our expertise, that's when we can have an impact.
I so admire what you just said. We can have it all, but all can't have you. That just speaks volumes, I think, on so many different levels, in the sense of what women, experience each and every day as we strive forward. Noreen, let's come to you. What are you doing right now, in the sense of what's most meaningful for you in the work that you're doing to empower women?
I think it's similarly education, but a lot of it is not so much specific education around finances or anything legal, but more generically, like coming up with your mission. How do you want to grow your business, and how can we make that happen? And actually making them sort of take some of the steps a little more seriously, because there are, on the one end, you can swing towards, I have a mission, I'm following my mission. And on the other hand, you can do it in a kind of blinded way. There's a smart way to do it, and there's a blinded way. And I think that particularly with entrepreneurs, they need to be educated about the actual sort of nuts and bolts of things like governance, of things like incentive compensation, and what that means to them, and what it means to incentivize other people, and how they have to make room. I mean, frankly, I'm taught a lot by my founder clients, particularly the millennials and the Gen Z, as to what teams are looking like now and how people are working together, because they have a very different focus on how they're working. But on the other hand, you still have to make sure that they are not completely naive about the world that they're going into. They're very idealistic when I deal with companies who have sort of a more mission bent, but they have to realize that they're going to be up doing business with and up against business partners or people on the other side of the table who don't have necessarily share the same mission and are not as collaborative, not as altruistic. And so some of it is like, sometimes I have to be the bad guy and be like, you have to think about what's going to go wrong too, because a good contract actually will try to think ahead and maybe save you from something. So it's an interesting balancing act between, leaning into the collaboration and stepping back for reality, a little bit of a reality check sometimes.
Noreen, it's interesting, and we were talking about this in our prep for this event as well. And Robyn, I'm sure that maybe you can empathize with it as well, is that, so many entrepreneurs have incredible ideas and amazing products, right? And they may have even gone as far as identifying what that white space is in the market, but they're not necessarily thinking through at first launch until much further on, when they're significantly much larger in terms of scope and employee headcount, even, for example, that they may not have had all the infrastructure pieces in place from an HR perspective, or from the legal perspective, or just from the, from the how do we build this as a business perspective. Let's talk a little bit about that, in the sense of what's happening now in this moment in time. And do you think it's a moment in time for deeper reflection around getting your house in order? Noreen, I'll start with you and then we can go to Robyn.
Okay. Actually, I think so. I think there are a lot of the times are so challenging right now that every business has been shaken to the core, and there are a lot of different ways that businesses are reacting, because everyone is reacting, but you can react in a way where you just want to, like, you're putting out fires and you're just trying to stay afloat, or you can react in a way that's forward thinking and trying to understand there are changes happening right now. There are changes that are going to be here forever. Like, for example, this video, this whole digital environment that we've all just embraced in the last 3 months. Even when COVID's gone, I don't think that's going away. And now I will say, in the case of Mayshad, it's been a remarkable. You went from having countless live events a month to having countless live video events a month. That was an incredible pivot, and it allowed you to actually build a new product, like a content base that's different from the one that you already had in your old business model. So that's a way of like pivoting forward. I have clients who are rethinking their distribution models because they realize that they can't get to their customers in the same way anymore, and they're making changes that will probably stay with them as they go forward in the future. So it's definitely a time to reevaluate, but good things can come out of it.
For sure. I think it's fascinating in this moment in time that we're all learning so much. And Noreen, you're right. Like we completely shifted our business strategy seemingly overnight, in the sense of being really responsive to what we saw happening, and yet using this time to also take a step back and say, okay, so as we move forward, like really, what is the best course of action? How can we both be, our product is obviously, bringing quality content and opportunities for women to connect with each other and connect in a much larger, broader scale, in the sense of helping women make money together as well. And so for us, the transformation seemed very natural when you're in it and you're doing it, right? And there's also then this moment in time to make sure that you're very purposeful and taking a step back and saying, okay, so is this aligned with what our goals and objectives are? Is this either getting us more votes, or is it bringing in more revenue, or is it, contributing to the greater good? And I think that in our conversations that we're having with our larger ecosystem, there's a lot of that discourse happening right now. And Robyn, I'm interested to know what you're seeing in this moment in time too.
So I think one of the things that I've uncovered since launching my firm more formally just a couple of months ago, but that I've seen for years and years, is there's a cultural assumption that when you're an entrepreneur, when you're a business owner, when you've reached a certain level of success, whatever your definition of success is, that you have a certain amount of knowledge, of acumen. And a little bit of it is, fake it till you make it for some of the entrepreneurs and how they've gone along. But now with this, such an abrupt stop to everything, right? Personal, professional, and the likes, it's taken, I've seen a lot of folks to a place where they've had to pause. They've had to say, does this really make sense? They've had to have some really difficult conversations, whether it was, merely by circumstance of being in their own apartment or in their own home by themselves and kind of spending their time and really introspecting, but really coming to grips with those cultural assumptions. Wait a second, what's behind all this? What do I need to know? What do I need to learn? And then at the same time, they're having to rely on different skill sets, right? I'm sure your team, they weren't necessarily comfortable with virtual, or the millions of organizations that have turned virtual, or the business developer or that entrepreneur that knows that they can sell when they get in front of somebody across the table on a drink, but now they're having to do it on video, and it's calling upon new sets of skills, right, that are somewhat more technical, right? You can't really talk your way around something when you're on a Zoom. Right? When you're in person, there's different things that you can pull upon, right? And I mean, that goes all into the Zoom fatigue and all those things, but right, they're having to draw on newer skills, on skills that they might not have necessarily learned specifically. And so I'm getting a lot of inbound requests to go back to the basics, right? Whether it was what I was talking about in my first comment about just learning the basics, ABCs of how to manage your money, to I'm working with some pretty big hitter professionals right now behind the scenes, because they've been asked to step up and run funds that they've never run funds before, right? So they're saying, well, wait a second, I know I can almost fake it till I make it, but I need some foundational knowledge here. So I'm seeing a lot of that, and it's really refreshing, right, for people to raise their hand and say, I'm not sure I know what I'm doing, but I'm going to find the resources to help me. And by and large, the resources are out there in many different ways.
The reaching out aspect, I'm sorry,
No, go ahead.
It reminded me of another aspect of this whole environment that I think is probably here to stay is community. I think that being faced with this COVID isolation has made most people realize that they actually don't like isolation, and that in fact people want to be part of something. And so when I think of that in the context of my clients or businesses, for example, I think that they're actually many businesses have already started recognizing that a while ago, and they're creating more consumer, client and customer reaction, and they're creating communities. But those who haven't are beginning to. They're figuring out ways to do that because, I think that there's more that people want to be together. And I think that this idea of like, I'm sorry, Robyn, you're going to say something?
No, I don't.
No, I think they want to be together, and they want to have, and they're changing their products and their service offerings in a way that's kind of molding around this community idea. Yeah. And also they're being more reactive to their customer base. Like, for example, I'm seeing some shift in things like the retail market, because inventory is a disaster. If you have a lot of inventory, what are you going to do with it right now? So now there are new business models of, do I need to keep all the inventory? Maybe I need to go to some kind of different kind of product that I can have, produced in a different way on order, et cetera. So there's a lot of change going on right now.
To your point about community, and that's why I jumped on it, because I got really excited. One of the things, I agree with you, people want to be together, people want to be in contact, but now we're starting to see almost not a periphery, but where a lot of big business and ideation and change and entrepreneurship is really centered around bigger cities en masse, right? And so conversations and interactions between folks that weren't necessarily geographically located near those cities to participate in activities and lectures and deals or whatever. Now everything is digital. The playing field is leveled for that incredible entrepreneur who is just more comfortable living somewhere that's not as accessible. And we're starting to see those folks come out of the woodworks, actually not just start, but they're present, bringing different ideas, bringing different, to your point, different business models, in a really unique and different and quite frankly, disruptive in a good way, ideas to business, ideas to literacy, ideas to everything out there. It's really fun to see that.
I'm wondering also, during this period of time of transformation and pivoting and just really shaking things up, both of you have had experience shaking up your own careers as well, particularly during moments of times in our economy, in our culture, that were very transformative in and of themselves. Would love for both of you to share your experiences in the sense of who you were in the past and who you are now and what you hope to be when you grow up. Noreen, let's start with you.
I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up, because I feel like I'm always reaching, but my journey was motivated by different things. When I started my career out of law school, I went to work for a very big multinational law firm and worked abroad for a good chunk of my time, which is what I really wanted to do. I worked in London and Tokyo. But I did a lot of, work with bankers, but I wanted to work for a company. And so when I came back, I got a job at a Fortune 100 company. I worked at HBO for 8 years doing international corporate development. It was fabulous, but it was also in a way a little bit limiting being in that corporate structure. And also, I really wanted the international job, and for me, the job changed. So I decided, well, okay, like a lot of women, took a mid-career break. For a few years, I was home with my daughter, and I was just ready to go back to work. And I was actually just starting to send out those resumes after a few years, about 4 years. And that's when Bear Stearns went under. So literally at the start of the financial crisis is when I wanted to go back to work, which was, I realized very quickly, and then after Lehman, it's like, it's not going to happen. And I thought, okay, well, I've been out of the workplace for a while. I'm like a round peg for a square hole. And also, there are no jobs, people in my field. So if I ever want to get a job again, I have to do it. I have to just go out there and do it. I've had some other play around at some other businesses in the past, but I essentially launched a law firm in the middle of a recession, and with a goal of taking that the change in the environment then, which was companies were getting tight-fisted and they were really pushing back on those large law firm fee structures. Because I had that background, Fortune 100 company, big law firm, top 10 law firm, that I thought I would create a boutique, which offered that same level of services with, lower overhead, much more value-based pricing, and it turned out to be a pretty successful model. So, but the model came out of my starting in the middle of a financial crisis. I don't think that opportunity would have been there had it not been for the financial crisis.
Noreen, and during this time also, what did you learn about yourself that you think is really helpful for those of us who are watching today? And we have a mix of corporate executives, entrepreneurs, and business owners. Many women in our ecosystem are going through mass change for themselves, either because they've been furloughed or laid off, or they're using this time to really think about, what is the meaning of life? What am I doing? And, how can I make a bigger impact in the world by, in whatever shape or form that takes. But what did you learn about yourself that you think would be helpful for all of us to learn about?
Well, I did learn that I actually am entrepreneurial, and I believe that's really in my bones. But I learned that you can teach yourself how to get out there and create something, and even if you think you're shy, you can learn how to network. You need to have something to say, and you need to listen. So prepare a couple of things to say and prepare to listen a lot. And over time, it's going to get easier. And over time, it's going to get really fun. So that's the fundamental things that I think I really learned about myself.
Thank you, Noreen. Robyn, let's go to you.
Gosh, I don't even know where to start except to say, Noreen, I hope that history will repeat itself with me and my work. I went to school, trained economist, started on Wall Street, and that was sort of the next 20 years or so of my career in various capacities. But just like I was mentioning how, philanthropy and investing were very bifurcated in my life, I kept my work in finance and portfolio management and research and the work that I was doing helping in the wealth management world very separate than all the work that I was doing as a lay leader, be it raising money or on the ground rolling up my sleeves, volunteering or doing the balance sheets for an organization. I mean, everything. I kept those worlds very separate. And then somewhere post-financial crisis, I said, I can't keep this together. I can't keep these separate, right? I didn't want work to know how much time I was spending volunteering, even though work was filling my pockets and putting food on the table. The volunteer work was sort of almost filling my soul, if you will. And my volunteer work, I didn't want them to know where I worked because it was access to capital and just it got complicated. And that's in 2008, 2009 when I discovered the world of impact investing, and that was shortly thereafter. Rockefeller Philanthropy, Anthony Buck-Levine, and those guys sort of coined the modern term impact investing. Sometimes when I'm talking about it, and because I'm the trained economist and Adam Smith and the invisible hand of the marketplace, there is a very little known concept of the invisible heart of the marketplace. And so I did a lot of research. Where could I go with this? How can I integrate this? How can I be a bridge builder between traditional capital and social change and do it in a way that everyone's going to understand, right? Because you've got this world of this ecosystem of folks trying to really do well and do good. And then you've got this other ecosystem of people that really just want to do well for themselves and how to put that together. And so I changed sides of the table and I became an advisor. And I became an advisor at the bank that was known for being able to talk to clients about impact, being able to build strategy, being able to talk to multi-generations and build the bridges between even the generations based on impact, based on philanthropy, based on common or sometimes not so common interest and engagement. And I kind of turned that, what I love to do into passion, or my passion into what I do. And, what was that, 18, 19 years of, constantly being on the go. And then, as luck would have it, there's a funny Yiddish proverb that I won't say in Yiddish, but it says, man plans and God laughs. I brought a very personal side of my story. I got married, had a baby, moved out of New York City, all within about 2 years, I think it was. And so that necessitated a change of career. And so I joined a friend, and then I had my son. I joined my friend in her business, and then I took about a year off, and I started looking to go back into the corporate world in September of last year. And then sort of in January, it was very clear that I had some geographical challenges, which now is kind of almost a joke, really, right? And realizing that I had a lot that I wanted to say and a lot that I wanted to do. Now, through most of my career working at bigger institutions, I fancied myself as the intrapreneur, the person that had the patience that can create and shift culture from within, to be the one that sits there and kind of constantly works at, the institution, the ivory towers, whatever you want to call them, to shift thinking to, for inclusion, for diversity, whatever the issue was. I always had a lot of patience to kind of work within. And then all of a sudden in January, when I wasn't going anywhere, I said, gosh, I think I just need to do this under my own label, whatever you call it. I've been doing it for 20 years. But now, what was really important to me? What do I really want to be spending my days and nights? And that's where, I sort of said, I love the educational piece. I love the look on people's faces when they finally understand correlations and portfolios and investing and philanthropy and all of these basic concepts. And oh, by the way, you can actually invest and do well and do good, right? You can actually put money towards something that's solving some of the world's largest challenges. It's like a light bulb, and then everybody wants to learn more, but it's a process, right? And so having the patience to teach and educate. So I actually refer to myself sometimes as the accidental entrepreneur, right? Having started my own shop. And to what I was saying earlier, like I got my EIN number in February. I was supposed to launch on March 13th, which apparently is like considered the day that the world changed. Right? And I was supposed to launch with a party with the fashion house Rebecca Taylor. We were going to do some work around workforce justice and gender lens investing and do some shopping. It was going to be really fun. I mean, I didn't even know I needed a launch party, but a friend of mine who works at one of the stores, like, we'll do it up and we'll have fun. And so I kind of tabled it for the month because what was going on. And, I was starting to get some inbound calls from friends that sort of knew that I was in process and what's going on and all of the outreach that was going on from the pandemic, which was really, a silver lining in it all. So in April, I decided to formally launch because April happens to be National Financial Literacy Month, but how to make it relevant and how not to come out with, right, like I'm here with a new business, buy my services, come work with me in a moment in time where the tone was very different. Everybody's hurting. Everybody is worried about everything. How could I be out there? And so that literacy piece, that working with people who receive the extra $600 a week in unemployment or the $1,000, $1,200 check, who might not even have bank accounts, how to help them respond if they've lost their income, right? How to talk to their creditors, what to do, how to make crisis budgets. And all of these things is what I was focused on for the last couple months. And then out of that, I started having all these conversations with folks that I was talking about earlier in our conversation that are recognizing, hey, wait a second, I need that help too. I need that sort of private space to say, wait, I don't know. And I've been assuming I know all along. So here I am, and it's definitely been a journey.
Well, Robyn, congratulations. This is massive and enormous, and so happy for you. And, I'm listening to both of you, and I'm picking up on a few different themes here, and I'm wondering if we could talk about those in the sense of particularly around, your ability to stay nimble, to stay agile, to stay flexible, to be resilient, right? And to really be able to step back and say, I'm going to be at the forefront of this change and be proactive instead of waiting for the change to affect and impact me. And, we talk about that a lot at Mayshad too, and just in the sense of, for ourselves individually as professional women, like what does it take right now during this moment in time to be successful and to stay ahead of what's happening, knowing that week by week things are changing, right? And so there isn't necessarily maybe not a 12-month plan anymore. Maybe it's a 3-month plan or a 2-month plan or even a week by week plan at this point. But I'm wondering in the sense of understanding the complexities and nuances around being resilient and understanding that there's a balance and an importance for both paying respect to the short term and the long term. And how are you incorporating that into the work that you're doing now with your clients? Noreen, we'll start with you.
You mean being resilient in the way they run their business?
Yeah.
I think that I think a lot of it has to do with sort of maybe resetting their goals, like thinking about what do they need, what must they do now, what do they want to do now, and what their vision is for the future and how it's changed. And a lot of it is just also helping them or encouraging them to find ways to keep their spirits up and their morale up. And I think that's where that community and team building comes in. Like our office, for example, I'll give our office as an example. We're actually an international law firm. We're a small boutique, but before COVID, I was averaging total 3 to 4 months abroad across the year. Like I do a lot of international travel, a lot. And so does my co-founding partner. And so we are not together that much, but yet we are a team. And we have actually been together even more during COVID because of the video chat. It's like we feel like it's almost more important. And so I think that helps us keep our morale up. And I think that I'm seeing that with other companies also, especially because a lot of the startups, and the younger ones, they've scattered. They've gone to their homes, their parents' houses or whatever. So they're not together. But it's even easier for them to manage that kind of a separation because they're more accustomed to technology than, say, a larger company. And some of my larger clients are some of them who are like, because I have a lot of inbound clients from Europe. So some of them they're separated by continents, so they have to take a lot of they're putting a lot more effort into engaging the staff in the different parts of the world and some of the staff in the different parts of the world and the employees are actually getting more time in front of management now than they have in the past, because everyone thinks that this is a special time and they're actually reaching out and it's making a difference in the way that that their organization is reacting to this. And I find that a very fascinating phenomenon, that actually people are getting more face time now than they had before COVID.
That's interesting. And I think that also the technologies that we use now to stay in contact with each other are more humanizing, Noreen, to your point, but they're also equalizing in the way where you don't necessarily experience, because you're not in the office, the hierarchical structure of just how offices and companies present themselves optically as well. And I'm wondering, I really hope that continues after people start to go back to the physical office as well, because I absolutely agree with you. I think that there's so much to be said about just having more face time, and in a personalized way too. Like we're looking into each other's homes right now as well, right? And so we do that when we're on Zoom. Like we actually see more personality come through because we're not necessarily just under the corporate the appearance of the corporate culture, right? Day after day, we're actually kind of in each other's homes. So it's refreshing, and also for many people also very challenging too, right? To be able to maintain
humanizing.
That. Yeah, exactly. Robyn, I'd love to get your perspective on this as well.
So as Noreen was answering, it's an extension really of what you were saying, because I'm seeing a lot of the same, but really looking at one's definition of success. What does that really mean? What do you really want to achieve? And I think that there are a lot of cultural assumptions, and clearly that's a big part of what I've been doing. That you have to have the most zeros in your bank account that you can, and you have to have 25 meetings in a day and be running all over and have the nicest, prettiest things, and these things, and consumerism and consumption, and all of that's being questioned again personally and professionally. And so a lot of the work that I've been doing even more so is sort of helping people define success, helping people define what it is that they want and what's enough, And then once they define what's enough, what do they do with their more than enough? And that's when we can get creative with capital and ways to invest, and introducing different concepts and things that you can actually do. Why wait until passing to create a living create a living legacy, create those projects that you didn't think you want to do. A lot of people have cleaned out their closets, right? And like, do you need that 10th white t-shirt? And what if you don't buy that? Or and I'm obviously speaking to a different socioeconomic level, and even for the varied socioeconomic status, it's also determining patterns and relooking at, again, going back to what is success, right? Sometimes we make these goals that are so unachievable. I'm not saying that you shouldn't reach for the stars, but figure out which stars you want to reach and then build a plan towards that. So I've been having a lot of those conversations related to business or individuals, and quite frankly with businesses too. So it's been interesting.
Robyn, I want to go back to something you said earlier around the invisible heart of capital. Love, 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 love that. And let's talk about it now in the context of the work that you both do around investing with your heart, investing with your values, using capital for good. And, we throw those terms around and those phrases often. We know that now that, many funds in the SRI space are outperforming other funds, which is amazing. And so I think that there's a heightened level of attention and awareness placed upon companies that are doing good or doing better in everything from sustainability and climate change to ensuring that they have more equitable and equal policies in place for women and people of color. But there's this conversion of all of these things that are happening right now. So I'd love to get both of your insights just in the sense of the work that you're doing in everything, Noreen, from your work with public benefit companies and how that really does differ from BCorps and charitable organizations, and Robyn, from the work that you do in values-based investing as well. Noreen, let's start with you.
Oh, happy to. Okay, so I work with companies that are essentially mission based. So they want to do not just business for the sake of business, but they actually care about some kind of societal good. And that's been a trend that's been going on for maybe 10 years or so. And there is an organization that started certifying companies that care about this mission. It's called the B Lab, and you can get a certification called a BCorp, where you're basically a company that has a mission. You've stated that your mission is to help some social good, environment, racial injustice, education, whatever it might be. But that's not a legal status. And so what happened after B Corp started catching on was the state legislators started paying attention. And there's probably maybe 2/3 of the states now have passed legislation that allows for that kind of an organization to exist. It's called the Benefit Corporation. And it's important because when you're a corporation, you have certain legal responsibilities in the way you're running yourself. There are laws that apply to your corporate governance. And one of the most important aspects of a corporation, a normal corporation, is that you have to conduct your business for the benefit of your shareholders. So if you're a B Corp or a benefit corporation, what the law does is it sort of changes the rules of corporate governance. It actually allows a company, as part of its DNA, essentially, to have not only the financial well-being and interest of its shareholders as its primary concern, but to also have some other kind of societal good as part of its mission. It's like legally mandated mission. So what happens is with the law is it builds a structure around not only setting out what that mission statement is in your governing documents, but also and in the documents that create the entity to begin with. Or a company can also switch to be a benefit corporation as well. It has the approval of its shareholders. But it also sets out a system for accountability and transparency. And the accountability aspect deals with rules around the company having to have a third party kind of analyze what they're doing on an annual basis. The company has to have a third party come in that's unrelated to the company and look at what it's done to fulfill its mission. and to evaluate whether or not it's met its own targets. And the transparency is that the states also require that the company actually create a report once a year for its shareholders explaining this is what we did to try to attain our mission, and this is how we've succeeded. Maybe this is how we failed, but these are the efforts we're making. Some states make that a public document where you have to file it. Some states you don't. But we are seeing a real growth in the number of public benefit companies that are being formed. And I would love to hear Robyn's take on this, and as the investor side of the market, what she's seeing with companies that are mission-based, that are advertising themselves as such, their access to capital and so forth. I mean, my feeling is that they're getting capital, that people are paying attention, and probably more so now. But I think it's a trend that's actually going to probably get even bigger now with the sort of changes in societal values around racial justice, for example, and the environmental changes, and as a population, the younger people start to come into more of their own in being in companies and startups and so forth.
Robyn, as we shift to you, also would love to also get your thoughts on everything that Noreen just asked and said, but then also, what does this mean for 501c3s in the sense of, companies now, even though we could argue that many companies had corporate social responsibility programs, and many companies even pre-COVID were doing things like, purchase one, will give one to, a global citizen in need, or giving back, tremendous amounts through monies and grants. But wondering, from your perspective, will this ongoing shift that Noreen alluded to, will it really impact the way in which we also think about charitable giving to nonprofit organizations?
I don't think we have enough time for me to share with you all my reactions and responses. So I'll try and be honest, because I might take some liberties. And I'm going to come back around. But I think when you were both talking, and I was trying to, what do I want to share about sort of this idea of values-based investing, of impact investing, doing this work a little bit differently. And for me, the passion very much comes from this concept that the financial services industry is kind of broken, right? It's been, I don't need to go into, male heavy and ethics and all these things. We all know that it's not working in the current state that it is for the most part. And I'm making broad generalizations. And I think that in order for there to be real change and real work being done and fixing, the financial services industry needs to pivot to not only be just a brain business, to be a brain and a heart business. And so what does that mean? It means having the tough conversations about things that matter more than just the return. It means having conversations about what your clients really want and how to achieve it, instead of doing it within the boxes of the traditional financial institutions and asset allocations and strategies. And I'm not saying that stuff is important, but what I'm saying is that empathy for all advisors, whether you're on the financial side or legal side, all these conversations need to include empathy, right? And empathy builds trust. Empathy builds knowledge, awareness. And that really is where I think the piece of all this really good work and values-based investing comes through. So I am seeing a lot of it, to Noreen's question, or to validate what Noreen's saying. I'm seeing it from all ends. I'm seeing, folks wanting to figure out how to respond to the civil unrest right now. I'm seeing people wanting to respond to, wait a second, I saw a picture pre-COVID of I don't know, pick an area of LA, and then 3 months into the quarantine, you can see, people talk. You could see things you haven't been able to see in 30 years. I think there was some mountain range, like I think in India, that we can now see. I mean, there's the images are incredible, and you can physically see it in front of you. And so people are saying, well, how can I actually use my assets to continue to do more of that? And I like to tell everyone to take a deep breath, take a pause, let's have honest conversations, and do the hard work up front about what's really important to you. What values really matter? Is it commitment, communication, compassion, courage, excellence, resourcefulness, stability, generosity, love, loyalty? What is it that you really want to project in what you're doing? And then we match that with issue areas. So one of the most common mapping is the Sustainable Development Goals, right, which were created in 2015. And we can probably have a whole nother session on that, but it's a set of 17 goals that include everything from building partnerships, gender, clean water, and it's over 150 some odd countries that participated in these. And it just gives a framework for investing, which issue area is the most important to you. And then we build strategy around that, right? And that strategy, to your point about 501c3s, can include everything from sort of this left end of the spectrum, which is catalytic philanthropy, and where you're giving a grant, so you're having 100% impact participation, but 0% market participation because you're not getting anything back except impact, all the way to catalytic capital, right, where you can have 100% market return and potentially 100% impact participation. Sorry, 100% market participation and 100% impact participation, right? So all along that spectrum is where we build strategy. That's what includes ESG, public-private partnerships, bonds, CDFIs, community development foundation, or institutions, which I believe is one way to get into investing in underserved communities, particularly people of color. That's one way to combat what's going on. But to the question about the 501c3s, I think that's going to be challenging. I think there are organizations out there that no matter what they do or how they run, are simply going to continue to rely on grants, are simply going to rely on the galas and the thises and the that's and the things that bring in the cash. But I think one of the areas, and this is some of the work that I'm doing with UJA Federation as co-chair of Impact Investing, is to start to shift mindset and culture to helping these organizations be more sustainable in creating recurring revenue sources internally. So if you're an organization that does a lot of teaching, maybe package your curriculum and sell it. If you're working with disadvantaged communities, maybe one day a week you work with advantaged communities that can pay, right? And I'm not saying that they have to turn into 100% profit making and they don't have to rely on grants and government assistance, but for the next generation, if I put two organizations in front of you and one is making 5% of their operating income, the other was making 0%, I'm going to go out on a limb and say most people are going to invest in the one that's trying to help themselves as well as help others, right? And so I think we're going to see some shifting in the model. Again, that's not to say some of those organizations that are just pure outward facing and take in grants aren't important, but I think it's a mix of everything. Mm-hmm. And that's why I have my clients take a pause and say it's not just a hard answer about putting money here, making a lot of money, and then putting it back into philanthropy, right? You could be hurting the environment with your investments if you're not careful, and your main issue might be working on the environment, right? So it's about balance. It's about being thoughtful. It's about communicating and really deciding what it is. And I think I hit on all of what you guys like. I wanted to take a deep breath and if there's anything you guys want to expand on.
We could have a whole different show just about this next question. So, when we think about, as a potential investor, for example, like actually how to allocate, how to balance your portfolio, how to diversify, a large part of this is really around the data analysis and data collection and ensuring that you really understand what you're analyzing. And I think that in the past, one of the big problems with publicly held companies is that, when you think about it through the lens of SRI investing, for example, the data is not always perfect. Right. And so even when you're thinking about having your money not be invested in something, say guns, if that's an issue that you care about, you may, unwillingly have money invested in a Walmart because Walmart, in a lot of instances, is not identified as a manufacturer, distributor, or seller of firearms, but a retailer. Right. And so are there ways in which we as investors, no matter if we're investing with our 401k or private investing or whatever the case is, can be better educated just in understanding how to better assess the data?
It's a really hard question.
I know.
You need a resource for that.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, Investing again with more empathy, more sympathy, with values is a very personal journey, right? What's in integral and impactful to me might not be for you, and we both might be, staunch environmentalists, right? But we have different definitions, we have different feelings of what that means, right? So while you can get as the data that you need to say, oh, this company is good or this company is not so good, right? It's about your own interpretation. And sometimes the data doesn't always work in your favor, and sometimes it does, right? I mean, the very first thing I learned at college was about data mining, right? Like, there's enough data out there, you can find the answer you want. So at the end of the day, it's about being purposeful in what you're doing. And so in the impact ecosystem right now, impact management and measurement is probably, if not the largest sort of piece that's being worked on. And it's controversial and it's challenging because at the end of the day, if I'm saying I'm making an impact investment, right, other than showing market return, which we can all measure, what else am I measuring? What are those important and salient points that is saying that I'm actually having an impact, right? So how many people am I reaching? How many, there's like a million different stats, but you have to define them early on in your process so that they can be followed. And so there's a lot more companies coming out of the woodworks that are helping people put together those definitions and those metrics. But again, some of those metrics, because they're what I like to say more EQ than IQ type things, right? Like it's sort of varied whether you've helped somebody or not, right? I mean, yes, if they're paying their own rent and they are going to a job and they are reaching certain sort of levels, that is binary, that is a yes or no. But then there's a lot of gray, which is making sort of the answer to that question really challenging. But again, if the intent is there, that's half the battle. And then, I think it goes back to the case of what I was saying about sort of like success, and let's pick a few things to focus on. So when we're talking about impact measurement, I think, especially because it's in financial services, all of a sudden you think it has to be complex and it has to be 15 different calculations, 6 ways till Sunday. But if it could be 2 or 3 things that show that you're having a positive outcome, not just financially, but also from an impact perspective, then that's okay. And we have to start somewhere. So it's complicated.
and that was an amazing answer. Thank you for that. Let's also, because I'm thinking about now, in some of the remarks that you made just around, preferences and the subjectivity of a lot of this. And, when we throw the generational divides into this as well, measurement and impact becomes even more subjective sometimes, just in the sense of what I may think is of importance and of materiality versus somebody else. Noreen, you had talked earlier about just the intergenerational impact of, the differences between, Gen Zs and millennials and, the forgotten generation, the Gen Xers, and then baby boomers. Like, how does that all kind of play out right now in the work that you're doing?
It's interesting because when I work with companies that have all with different generations within them, you can sort of sense where there are like breakdowns in communication or different approaches often to business. There really are. I think that, and there are very different approaches if it's women versus men, even in the same, I think, like within like a generation. Truly, my experience has been, for example, that women are much more collaborative, that they actually do want to be on a team, whereas men, although they might be on a team, they're not talking about it. They're not, it's not really part of like, oh, let's all get together in this room and find this great solution. No, it's all, I don't know. It's different. It's not the same language. And then there are definitely hierarchies that still have to be dealt with in organizations. And there's, it's going to be an ongoing educational struggle between the generations to get through that, because it's just not going to evaporate overnight. But I think that this COVID environment, and with like everyone forced to be on a video chat, for example, has shifted the balance a little bit.
one of the to take from a quote from one of my clients, she's like, I'm unapologetically female. I'm unapologetically collaborative. I'm unapologetically, empathetic and caring and concerned. She just uses that unapologetic as a way to kind of force the issue, to start those really difficult conversations. And I actually earlier today had a call with one of the founders that I'm working with, and I don't know, he's a guy in his mid 50s, and he's starting a tech software company, and I started to talk to him because it's all around financial literacy, and I brought up the issue of gender, and they have a boy girl, and I said, what about an other, right? And you could see that that's the kind of conversation that a woman would dive into and discuss and think about all the options. And he paused, and I paused, right? In that uncomfortable moment of who's going to speak first, because I wanted to challenge him, right? And I know that's just so out of left field example, but it was just very today that I was working with, this founder and challenging them. And I think there's a little bit of a rising to the occasion, and I can't wait to see how that converts. I know it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. And I think everyone needs to sort of buckle up and have a lot of patience, and it's going to be a long road, but at least it's out there now. It's out there, as my client said, in an unapologetic way.
Mm-hmm. So much of what we're talking about in the course of this conversation are in and of themselves traits and characteristics and personalities that we understand are going to be successful for the long term. We're like, whatever the new normal is that we go to, right? I guess we're kind of in the new normal now, but when we talk about, compassion and empathy and communication and teamwork and understanding and emotional intelligence and resiliency, those are what we perceive to be soft skills, right? And so it's interesting that in the past, success, right or wrong, was defined in a very masculine way, right? When you think about all the characteristics that make someone a strong leader or an effective company or a profitable company, right? And so I think now in a moment in time, like we're shifting toward a more, if we think about, the binary of male versus female, a more feminine approach to leadership and to sustainability and just to management of self and others. Let's talk about the complications of that, because for us as professional women, we've also been socialized in such masculine ways, right? And so we know that in some instances we've had to step into those more masculine roles. But if we're shifting all of this and shaking it up, what a great moment in time for us. But then there's also challenges associated with that because we are women too, right? Let's talk a bit about that and get your thoughts and perspectives. And I know that this was not a planned question, so I'm throwing this into the mix just based upon what I'm hearing now. I'm at the end of the shows, I always like to connect the dots, so this is me connecting the dots in the last few minutes of our parting words. Mm-hmm. Noreen or Robyn, either.
I kind of just showed my hand in that.
If I think about the challenges, I guess if I could focus on you, that was one of the things you mentioned, right? Like the challenges we have. I mean, I still see, and then changing of perceptions. I mean, one of the things that I don't know why this came to mind necessarily, what triggered it in my head with your question, but the whole question of like getting women on boards, for example, and the challenges that women face getting on boards. One thing that that have cropped up over the years are these like trainings, these like you can go to like big name, very, very big name school and pay $12,000 to $15,000 and get essentially like a certificate, like now you're ready to serve on a board. But education's always good, of course, but that comes from two places to me. It comes from a premise that we're not ready to begin with, so we need special training, which I disagree with. And also, like, that's not out there for men. And it also actually creates this feeling like in women, like, oh, I guess I really need to learn something else that I don't already know, So I feel like the challenge has got to be to stop thinking that the standards need to stop coming necessarily from men and being like you have to fit this mold kind of thing. I think that there needs to be more of a a development of gender neutral. Like when I go to meetings throughout my career, I never go in thinking, oh, I'm the only woman in the room. Like I don't even think about it. I'm just there doing whatever I'm doing. Sometimes I'm the only woman. Sometimes I don't even notice because it's actually personal relationships. I know these people, but it's hard to make a shift in like the way business is done to that. I mean, maybe it'll happen over time. It's going to be slow, but I don't know if that answers your question, but that's just what came to mind.
Robyn.
I mean, as you were talking and what I was explaining before, I mean, I still think the same challenges exist, right? Less funding of private companies and female founder, people of color, less board spots. You know, it's statistically proven that men will apply for a job if they have 2 out of the 10 requirements. Women will, if they have to have all 10, right? So these challenges still exist just because we have this new environment where there's more communication and there are, you know, more opportunities. We still have to focus on working through all of that, right? And figure out how we're going to use this new environment to fast track it. I think the other thing is making sure that we don't discredit, you know, some female powers as, you know, as assets, like vulnerability, right? Vulnerability is absolutely an answer. It allows you to be you. It allows you to make mistakes. It allows you to give permission to seek help. It makes you a pure human. It allows you to grow as a person. And so I think that is so important. And I think it'll continue to be a challenge. But in this current environment that we're all facing, everyone's feeling vulnerable inward, but how you use that outward is so important. And I think that's where we candidly have an advantage, men over women over men, right? But again, all of these things are challenging because I also think that in a lot of ways, once the world really does open back up and people feel comfortable going back into the offices, and you know, people keep saying I want to get back to normal, but I think it's a new normal. And I think what keeps me up at night a little bit is I don't necessarily want to return to all the things that were going on before. Not that it was all bad, but we've got all these amazing opportunities, and you know, there's a lot of hardship and there's a lot of fear over mortality and finance. I mean, it's a challenging time, and that can exist here at the same time as all these wonderful opportunities to do things differently for women, for us to get involved and to drive that change greater, to become more. And I don't like to use the word equality. I like to use the word just, because men are different than women, period, right? And so it's about having your just opportunity, right? And getting the justice and being treated, you know, justly and fairly. And I mean, you know, whatever that looks like. So I don't know, that kind of rambled out of my mouth what you were saying, but it's important. I think that these are all things that we can't just run back to what we were doing before as much as we want to, because it's comfortable. It's going to look different, and that's good, and that's exciting, and that's opportunity.
You know, and I also think that everything happens for a reason, and there's a reason why we're here right now. And I think that, yes, I mean, we all know and have had people close to us who have lost their lives or become incredibly sick. And, you know, we also understand that our country's going through massive transformation and massive change. And it's also about time, right? And, you know, to your point earlier around the fact that we can actually see outside now, we can see mountain ranges and clean air. And I think that there's a lot of good that can come from this in moments of times of great despair and great stress and anxiety and sadness too. Noreen, I want to go back to something you said around, you know, the courses to help women become board members. I saw Robyn nod. I saw myself nod in the reflection of the screen. I absolutely agree, 2000%. I think that, you know, one of the things that we strive every day to do at Mayshad is acknowledge the fact that we're already wow. Right. And that we already have a sense of accomplishment, and to celebrate that and to feel good about that and not feel shame or embarrassment or to feel like we're less than. And what we find is that there's so many opportunities for women out there to everything from learn how to love yourself more, to learn how to end the conflicts with your kids, to like all of these things that, you know, invite us to feel less than or to feel like we're not good enough. And you're right, Robyn, like men don't experience those things, right? And so, and 2000% totally agree with the fact that, men will apply to something knowing that they maybe have 2 qualifications from the checklist. Women, for so many different sociological and cultural reasons, feel that need for perfection before they take a risk. And a lot of very valid reasons for that. But I think this is also a moment in time where we rise above that and say, we're not just good enough, we're really good. Right. And to use that to be able to claim that for ourselves now and what we create for the new future.
I think the hard work it has to be done on all sides. It's not just we're here and we deserve it. We have to earn it too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So final question for the day. One of my favorite questions. What advice would you give to your 16-year-old self? And what advice would you give to your 70-year-old self?
Wow. Okay.
This is a surprise.
I'll start.
Okay.
I'll start. Okay. To my 16-year-old self, I would say to always have the courage of your convictions and to build your network, build your community throughout your life. Every relationship is worthwhile. And to try to, grow that and keep in touch and follow your passions to the extent you're able, and balance doesn't always mean that, everything's balanced at the same moment. Sometimes you get something this week and something else next week, but, try to seek a balance of life and your professional work.
Thanks, Noreen. What would you tell your 70-year-old self?
I would sort of look back. So that's looking back. I would have told myself that I, maybe could have developed more of my communities more in my younger life. I probably could have, more people from college, more people from elsewhere. But that I think that, I don't know that I've at that point I already would have evolved, like I'm already seeing myself evolving more towards my altruistic philanthropic passions as I get older. I don't really know what I'd tell my 7-year-old.
That's fair. Robyn.
It took until I was in my late 30s until I really truly believed and experienced enough ups and downs to believe that everything happens for a reason. And so I think that that's exactly what I would say to my 17-year-old self, as well as trust your gut. I think that through the ups and downs of experiences, thus far in my life, everyone talks about trusting your gut, what the real answer is. And I think people do, but what nobody talks about is the second part, which it might take a lifetime to trust your gut and follow it, right? There's a difference, right? So whether it's a relationship or whether it's some part of business, you could know it's not necessarily the right thing, but until you have the courage to act on that, it could be a lifetime, and that's okay. So that would probably be the second lesson. And to my 70-year-old self, oh my goodness. I mean, right now, of all the challenges I'm going through, like I mentioned at the, before we got online, that my nanny and my and our babysitter have quit on me in the same day, and we've got a bunch of challenges over here, and I've got 17 months, and I'm trying to launch a business, and it'll all work out. I think I would say to my 7-year-old self, you just stay the course and, get the emails and the stories written at 3:00 in the morning. It's worth it. That's a really hard one. Thanks for the challenge. It's going to be like 2:00 in the morning and be like, oh my goodness, that's what I really wanted to say.
Well, thank you so much. I invite you both back because we have so much more to talk about. We'll do the 2.0 version of this. Thank you so much, Noreen. Thank you, Robyn, for being with us here today. Thank you, everyone who tunes in each and every week for our Women in Money series. I'm Jan Mercer-Dahms, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. Please make sure to stay tuned to all of our upcoming programming. You can find out more at joinmayshad.com. And please also, we invite you to take a look at all of our opportunities for membership as well. We have some really interesting, really think outside the box ways for you to become involved as a member. Thank you, everyone. See you next time. Have a great afternoon. Bye.
Thank you, Jen. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.